Welcome to I-24 News Defense, your weekly review of strategic affairs, security, intelligence, and more, brought to you in cooperation with Israel Defense Magazine. Tonight, we'll discuss IDF Naval Special Forces' latest operation far away from Israel's coast and explore women in the battlefield. But before we begin, let's take a look at what else is happening in the world.
We begin in Ukraine, where pro-Russian forces took up positions outside military installations and flooded the streets of Crimea in what President Putin described as preserving Russian interests after the impeachment of President Yanukovych. US President Obama issued a warning saying that President Vladimir Putin's reason for his incursion into Crimea is unacceptable. We continue to North China, where on Sunday 10 assailants slashed to death 29 people and wounded more than 150 at the Kunming train station. The authorities said that the terrorist attack was executed by Uyghurs, an ethnic separatist group from the far west. 4 of the attackers were killed and 3 more were arrested. Chinese leaders paid tribute to the victims at the opening session of an advisory body meeting. We conclude in Venezuela, where thousands of protesters flooded the streets of Caracas seeking to keep pressure on the government on the anniversary of Hugo Chávez's death. Hundreds of them threw rocks and Molotov cocktails at National Guard troops, who responded with crowd control devices in an area that has become the scene of near-daily clashes. At least 18 people killed and more than 260 were injured since the protests erupted a month ago, constituting the biggest challenge yet to the nearly year-old government of Chávez's successor, Nicolás Maduro.
1,500 kilometers into the Red Sea, Israeli Navy SEALs successfully seized a ship that was carrying dozens of advanced Iranian-supplied rockets made in Syria en route to Palestinian militants in Gaza. I-24 News correspondent Charles Biblitzer has more on that.
A small window into the covert war being waged between Israel and Iran. On Wednesday, the IDF intercepted an Iranian shipment of advanced weaponry destined for the Gaza Strip.
While Iran is conducting these talks, smiling to the international community, it continues to arm terrorist groups, it continues to perpetrate terrorism around the world. Such an outlaw regime must not be allowed to have the means to make atomic bombs.
Several months ago, IDF intelligence identifies a weapons transfer of M302 rockets from Damascus to Tehran, a move orchestrated by Iran's elite Quds force. The missile, with a maximum range of 215 kilometers and a warhead weighing as much as 175 kilograms, would place Israel's major civilian centers at risk. The weapons are moved from Tehran to Bandar Abbas Port in southern Iran and subsequently loaded onto a civilian vessel, the KLOS-C. The ship docks in Qasr Port in Iraq, where it is loaded with additional containers with the aim of whitewashing the Iranian connection. It then heads towards Port Sudan, but is intercepted by the elite Israeli Naval Commando Unit Shayetet 13. Alternatively, the rockets would have been transferred by land through the Sinai Peninsula and into the hands of Gaza-based groups such as Hamas and the Islamic Jihad.
We didn't have to use massive force. We boarded the ship. We take good care of the crew. We will escort this ship to the place where it will be unloaded, and we'll expose everything on it.
And the Iranian regime is the greatest terror exporter all over the globe, not just regarding Israel and the Gaza Strip. This is the case vis-à-vis Syria, Hezbollah in Lebanon, terror factions in Afghanistan, in Iraq, Bahrain, Yemen, South America, Africa, Asia, all over the globe.
Wednesday's haul is distinguished by the lethality of its cargo. The M302, in the wrong hands, would have the capacity to upset an already volatile regional balance.
Joining me now in the studio is Amir Oren, senior military and government analyst from Haaretz daily newspaper. Good evening.
Good evening, Klaus.
So 1,500 kilometers from Israel, a very impressive operation. How complicated is it?
It's complicated, first of all, intelligence-wise, and therefore there are two very tense moments in such an operation from the word go. The first is boarding the vessel and finding out that there will be no resistance, which of course brings a sigh of relief to everyone in the command headquarters as well as within the force. And the second one is searching the cargo and finding out that yes, intelligence was accurate, it is the correct cargo, because otherwise we would have seen some shamed faces.
Right. Falling into the wrong hands, this cargo could have been a game changer, right? We're talking about the M302 rockets.
Yes, but the question is what game exactly are you referring to? If you are referring to another round of fighting between Israel and Hamas or Islamic Jihad in Gaza, perhaps for a couple of days until the Israeli Defense Forces overran Gaza and destroyed all of them. However, the bigger game is the Iranian-Israeli deterrence or balance of terror, which exists in case Israel decides to attack the Iranian nuclear infrastructure. At that time, the Iranians would have liked both Hezbollah from the north and the Palestinian organizations in the south to launch their rockets into Israeli population centers, air bases, and other infrastructure targets.
This operation is what the IDF calls a battle between wars, to just preventing the weapons to fall into the wrong hands, right?
A few years ago, the Israeli Defense Forces, in one of its cliches, used to say that the military is always in either of two stages, either fighting a war or preparing to do it. The current Chief of Staff, Lieutenant General Benny Gantz, whom we saw in the clip a moment ago, says that there is a third stage. This campaign between the wars, the covert war, which is ongoing. The Navy, for instance, has conducted 65 such operations, not all of them so exposed, some of them very covert with submarines, with naval commandos and the like, but it is an ongoing campaign, one of whose aims is to forestall the need to go to war.
Right. You talked about the intelligence and the intel gathering. How can you give us a sense of what it took to prepare to this operation?
The Israeli intelligence network, composed mostly of the Directorate of Military Intelligence within the IDF and Mossad, but also other organizations, obviously conduct surveillance over Syria, which is where the missiles took off from, Iran, the Persian Gulf, various seafaring routes and organizations, maritime movements. And obviously it was a puzzle where each piece had to fit in. And at first, the Israeli intelligence agencies believed that once loaded in Bandar Abbas, the Iranian port, the ship is going to head to Port Sudan immediately. They were surprised to find out that it headed in the other direction, north to Qasr in South Iraq, and therefore it had to take another intelligence operation to follow it.
Amir Oren, thank you so much for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Going up, troops from U.S. Marines Force Company held a 3-day extensive exercise. One of their mission was to jumping from V-22 Osprey planes. One of the Marines explains in this next report.
There's always that sense of realism where you're like, wow, I'm about to jump out of an aircraft. This is real. There's, the Earth's below me. But once you jump and you go through your procedures correctly and you remember your training, it all kind of falls into place, and you realize, hey, I'm confident enough to do this. I've received the training. I'm prepared to do what I need to do in order to insert with my team. Everybody, they look at it as being this really cool, sexy thing, but at the end of the day, it's another way to insert. It's another way to get guys on the ground in order to conduct and complete the mission. That's the biggest thing, is you can't get too wrapped around the axle of oh man, that was cool, I just jumped out of an airplane. You really need to get your head in the fight and remember that you still have another 2 to 3 days of mission to conduct.
Fighter pilots, commanders of naval warships, infantry fighters, and even a major general. Today, there's much more women in the IDF combat units, but it is the real revolution. Before we discuss this issue, here's a report about 3 young women a moment before they got their prestige pilot's wings.
3 new female Israeli Air Force pilots will march ecstatically in a passing out parade in northern Israel, after 36 months of a very demanding program in which most of the graduates were men.
I am very excited. After 3 years in which you were just hoping to reach the finish line and graduate the academy, you are finally here.
Dana, Sarah, and Noah are joining their friends in the skies. Dana, originally from Haifa, swapped her Israeli Scouts uniform in the flying suit of a military transport